All right, let's jump right into this explainer. We're going to unpack a massive, mind-bending thought experiment that basically flips everything we think we know about space warfare on its head. We'll be walking through a fascinating piece of analysis called Gravity and Grievance, which digs into the terrifyingly practical physics and logistics of what the first real interplanetary conflict in human history might actually look like. So here's the big question to kick things off. What if Mars actually declared war on Earth? Now, I want you to immediately forget your favorite sci-fi movie tropes. You know, the neon laser battles in the void, the massive alien ground invasions, none of that. As we're going to see in this analysis, an actual interplanetary war wouldn't be fought with flashy space fighters. Instead, it would be this incredibly cold, meticulously calculated game of physics, absolute resource denial, and extreme tactical asymmetry. To really understand how something like this starts, we have to look at the people involved. We're talking about a group referred to as the Dustborn. These are the first generation of humans actually born and raised entirely on the Red Planet. Think about that for a second. This generation has literally never seen a vast blue ocean. They've never felt a natural breeze, never stood under an open blue sky. Because of that profound physical separation, they'd have absolutely no sentimental attachment to Earth. In fact, they wouldn't see Earth as this warm, maternal cradle of humanity at all. They'd likely view it as a bloated, incredibly resource-hungry tyrant trying to control them from millions of miles away. And that fundamental, psychological disconnect leads us directly to our first major battleground, the high ground and the asymmetric physics of space warfare. Okay, so Mars operates on just 38% of Earth's gravity. Now, why does that matter so much? Well, in space warfare, the absolute most critical determining factor is gravity. Because Mars has vastly lower gravity, it sits much higher up in the solar system's gravitational well compared to Earth. That physical reality hands Mars a massive, almost insurmountable strategic advantage when it comes to offensive logistics. Basically, throwing things down a gravity well is always going to be fundamentally easier than throwing things up one. And that leads to this terrifying application of their gravity advantage, the rock strategy. Mars wouldn't even need to build expensive, complex nuclear weapons to devastate Earth. They could literally just take automated mining equipment they already have stationed out in the nearby asteroid belt, strap some small ion thrusters onto heavy iron-nickel asteroids, and just gently nudge their trajectories. Earth's own massive gravity well does the rest of the work. It would accelerate these rocks until they hit our planet with the devastating force of multi-megaton nuclear bombs. Cities get vaporized, and the most chilling part, it leaves zero radioactive fallout behind. It's terrifyingly efficient. Plus, on top of those offensive capabilities, Mars holds the launch advantage. Launching a missile, a satellite, or a warship from Mars takes just a fraction of the fuel and energy needed to launch that exact same payload from Earth. This unbelievably low energy cost allows Mars to field a highly mobile, incredibly efficient orbital defense grid. Earth just literally cannot match the speed and economy of Martian space launches. So if Earth is fighting an uphill battle against physics itself, how do they even respond? That brings us to Earth's total blockade strategy, the ultimate weapon of endurance. Earth can't win a physics war, so let's examine how they counterbalance this by fighting a brutal, drawn-out war of attrition instead. It all comes down to how these two worlds survive. Earth possesses an open, self-sustaining biosphere. It just works, naturally. But Mars relies on a completely artificial ecosystem. Every single breath of air, every drop of recycled water, it's all strictly monitored and processed by a computer. And that right there exposes the fundamental, fatal vulnerability of a Martian colony. Earth knows this, right? So their response wouldn't be to try and shoot expensive missiles all the way up the gravity well. Instead, they'd implement an absolute, permanent trade embargo. They would enforce an impenetrable blockade zone, specifically targeting complex organic compounds, specialized medicines, advanced microprocessors, and, crucially, the heavy machinery and spare parts essential for keeping those Martian life support domes running. It is, at its core, a starvation tactic. Earth would coldly and methodically just wait, because without those critical spare parts from Earth, the fragile, deeply complex machinery keeping the Martian population alive is inevitably going to degrade. It will break down over time. It's a slow, suffocating grip on the entire planet. Now, at this point, you're probably asking yourself, why doesn't either side just send a traditional army, take over the other planet, and end the whole thing? Well, that brings us to the biological chasm, and why traditional ground invasions are completely impossible. The biological divergence makes a ground war a physical impossibility for both sides.
Think about it. If the Martians, who were raised entirely in 38% gravity, meaning they have thinner bones and less dense muscles, if they landed on Earth, they'd literally be crushed by our gravity. They'd need heavy, power-draining robotic exoskeletons just to stand upright. And worse, their immune systems, which developed in sterile, filtered domes, would face immediate collapse the second they were exposed to Earth's billions of natural viruses and bacteria. But flip it around. If Earth managed to send troops across the 7-month void of space, they're facing a tactical nightmare on Mars. Martians aren't going to fight in the open desert. They'll retreat into their subterranean, labyrinth-like lava tube cities. For an Earthling, one single bullet puncture in their pressurized suit means instant death. It turns every single firefight into a terrifying, zero margin for error scenario.
So, because neither planet could successfully occupy the other, this explainer leads us to a pretty chilling long-term legacy: the splitting of humanity. This perfectly summarizes the unprecedented interplanetary asymmetry we're dealing with here. Earth relies on its natural biosphere, Mars relies on low gravity. Earth's core strategy is a blockade. Mars uses kinetic bombardment. Earthlings are physically vulnerable to the vacuum of space, while Martians are vulnerable to high gravity and pathogens. It's quite literally a war of physics fighting biology to an absolute unbreakable standstill. Neither side can strike a final, decisive blow without completely destroying themselves in the process. So eventually, out of sheer necessity, they'd have to formalize a treaty. But that resulting peace, it would be heavily underscored by a 3 to 22-minute communication lag, just depending on where the planets are in their orbits. That massive time delay would completely decouple their internet networks. You couldn't have real-time conversations, you couldn't share real-time media. Over the years, that lag would permanently break down any sense of shared cultural identity between the two worlds. By the time the dust finally settles, the solar system would be permanently divided into two distinct, deeply suspicious human species. You'd have Earth, crowded, biologically rich, but heavily scarred from those asteroid bombardments, with a population permanently living in fear, constantly watching the sky. And on the other side, you'd have Mars, forced by the brutal realities of the blockade to evolve into this hyper-authoritarian, highly militarized, and deeply communal technocracy just to survive the harshness of their environment. Which leaves us with this incredible, honestly chilling thought from the analysis. This new branch of humanity on Mars looks up at the distant, pale blue dot in their night sky, not with nostalgia, but as a hostile alien empire. It's a staggering question to end on. By reaching out to colonize the stars, will our absolute greatest technological achievement simply be the creation of our own worst enemy? It's the kind of thought that definitely changes how you look up at the night sky.